series, now moving into Isaac and Jacob, having done Abraham in about 7 weeks previously. And the idea is now that we're going to move into Isaac, possibly. Thanks, people are seeing me. Yeah, possibly about 3 weeks into Isaac, and then on into Jacob for about seven weeks, something like that. And so the title of this particular series on Isaac is Surrendered with Isaac. My wife's managed to get it printed off. My iPad obviously isn't configured, so we can move that one. So the series of the studies on the fathers of the nation of Israel and our spiritual ancestors, to see what lessons and principles we can learn about the ways of God and our potential as we follow those ways in doing his will. So, having reached the end of the journey with Abraham and looked at the working of God's grace and the rewards, the blessings and the foundations laid through this remarkable life of faith, we now move on with the series of these brief studies on the lives of his son and grandson. So tonight it's Isaac, part 1, rites of passage, birth, death and marriage, in that order. Now, as we move on, folks, I want you to bear in mind that as the stories of these three people intersect, we'll be looking at some Bible passages for a second time, but now from a different angle, from the viewpoint of the life of the person whose life we're now considering, which now happens to be Isaac. So tonight I just want to break it down into three short sections as we sort ourselves out on the journeys of these other two patriarchs. First of all, of course, his birth. And just reading from the relevant passage in Genesis. Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him, as God commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And she added, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. So Isaac means laughter. And just want to refer back at this point to the time when both Isaac's parents had laughed in a different way, shall we say. And God had spoken to Abraham. We're going back to Genesis in chapter 17. As for Sarai, your wife, you are no longer to call her Sarai. Her name will be Sarah. I will bless her and will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she will be the mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her. Abraham fell face down. He laughed and said to himself, will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? And then just later on, the next chapter as it is, you may remember the heat of the day, there's Abraham sitting outside his tent, and these three strangers appear and asking Abraham, they say, where is your wife Sarah? There in the tent, he said. Then the Lord said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son. Now Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent which was behind him, and Abraham and Sarah were already old and well advanced in years, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, after I am worn out, and my master is old, will I now have this pleasure? And the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, will I really have a child now that I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Sarah was afraid and lied and said, I did not laugh. But he said, yes, you did laugh. So Sarah laughed to herself and then denied it, but God, of course, misses nothing. But now, this is the thing, it's a different sort of laughter. And Sarah is proud to name her son Laughter, delighted to acknowledge it. It's all different now. So in a sense, the son of Abraham and Sarah bears a name which, in a single word, tells a story of transformation from unbelief, irony, almost sarcasm, to delight, rejoicing, thanks, and worship, expressing the working of God's grace. Again, as I repeat, is anything too hard for the Lord? No, absolutely not, as we see here. The divine ability to give a new significance to the very human emotions was there present. And of course, we can see some of God's own irony, bringing a miracle out of unbelief, taking the original human response of laughter and turning it into one of glory to himself. Yeah, you laughed, but you're going to call that son that you laughed about laughter, because now welling up from inside her, there's that laughter and delight which Sarah experiences. And we, of course, look now into the New Testament to get the commentary of the writer to the Hebrews on that one. And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashore. When God is glorified, his people laugh unashamedly. And I think we're looking at this particular account here. You think Abraham's 100, Sarah's 90. Have you read in the paper recently of anyone where people have had children of that age? But it does show, doesn't it, that God can transform the places of despair and failure, confusion, disillusionment, and cynical laughter, and bring about his consolation and overcoming blessing. So, just a thought for you. If you have days of regret when you've missed it, when you could have believed, expressed your faith in him, and you fell short, he can and will colour those dreary days with his unending faithfulness. Heal them and make them precious to you as he takes these experiences captive to the outworkings of his plans and his purposes for you. Your part is to carry on from the point you're at, looking to him, trusting in him from that point on. You can't change the past. No, that's gone. But you can make it something precious. This can be the way in which God has turned impossible situation, the hopeless wrecks we've made by our interference in trying to change or avoid his plans for our lives, into something beautiful. Jesus, what did Jesus say to his disciples more than once when they'd missed the point and he was despairing of them? Where's your faith, etc., etc. And is it because Thomas doubting, missing the point? Come on, arise, let's go on from here. We can't change that, but let's learn from it and let's move on. And God is a God who will be glorified through human beings like us, who make mistakes, who get it wrong, who misunderstand, but then are not prepared to make the onward journey with him. And just thinking, was it Thomas Edison? How many attempts? Was it 10,000 before he made the light bulbs? Something like that. And he said it wasn't 10,000 failures. It was 10,000 ways I discovered of how not to make a light bulb. And he came to that. So it's that sort of attitude that moves us on. Now I am laughing because God has done something wonderful. My wish and my prayer for you, Lord, may we all bear many Isaacs. May Emmanuel be filled with open-mouthed, wide-eyed astonishment at all the Lord's going to do for us. And if you look at Psalm 26, wasn't it? When the Lord turned back the captivity of Israel, then they will laugh. Our mouths were open with laughter. Then said they among the heathen, God has done great things for them. And there may be times when we think that nothing's happening. Maybe times where we think the church is on the wrong end of injustice and wrong words and people stirring up, whether it's the Church Universal local or for ourselves in particular. But there will come a time when God turns back our captivity, whatever it is, when God puts laughter in our mouths, and then they outside will say, the Lord has done great things. And who knows, but those people will come to see the Lord and believe in him for themselves. Encourage yourselves with the expectation that Isaac miracles can happen for us many times a day, even today. So, there's a miraculous birth. But moving on, we find that Isaac grows. Sarah becomes very protective of her boy, sees him with Ishmael and reacts in a way which seems harsh and callous, sees Ishmael apparently mocking. And she says to Abraham, get rid of that slave woman and her son. God, as we know, finds Hagar in the wilderness, opens her eyes to water, answers Abraham's prayer that Ishmael may stand before God. Careful what you pray. But at the same time, this episode is prophetic, because God takes up Sarah's words in his letter to the Galatians to bring home to them and us the need to realize and hold on to the wonderful freedom which Jesus has brought for us. So Isaac represents for us a freedom in which we should stand. I just want to read just a few words, the relevant words from Paul's letter to the Galatians to you. And he says, tell me, you who want to be under the law, are you not aware of what the law says? For it is written that Abraham had two sons, one by the slave woman and the other by the free woman. His son by the slave woman was born in the ordinary way, but his son by the free woman was born as a result of promise. Now you, like Isaac, are children of promise. At that time, the son born in the ordinary way persecuted the son born by the power of the Spirit. It is the same now. But what does the scripture say? Get rid of the slave woman and her son, for the slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance of the free woman's son. Therefore, we are not children of the slave woman, but of the free woman. So we are Isaac's. We are children of the free woman. Abraham, of course, had already taken things into his own hands to try to make God's promise happen through Sarah's servants or slave lady Hagar. But as he found, he had to let God keep his promise in his own way, in his own time. As Sarah couldn't bear to have her slave girl Hagar and son Ishmael around anymore, now that her own child had come, no more should we ourselves allow ourselves to remain as slaves to the belief that we need to keep the law, trying day by day to please God and secure his promise by scoring as many rule-keeping points as possible. And this is what Paul was finding with this particular group of Christians in Galatia, that they had started okay with grace, but now they were trying to keep law, feeling they've got to keep the commandments and getting bound up by it. So he used an illustration. So here Isaac comes to us as an illustration of what it is to be free. And of course he goes on a few breaths later to say it was for freedom that Christ has made us free. Stand firm there in that freedom. He made us free to enjoy freedom, to go on in that freedom, to demonstrate that freedom to others. A freedom not where we have a tyranny of wanting our own way like as the world does, but the freedom of knowing that we are forgiven and we have that living relationship with God, that the law is written in our hearts and we obey him because it's a love and it's a joy for him. That's the wonderful thing. So the birth, the death. And it's not long after this, it's soon, well, obviously Isaac's been growing up, and one day God comes to Abraham, as he says, now I want you, Abraham, to take your son, and he puts it this way, your only son whom you love. Yeah, he doesn't mince words, God, when he speaks to people at times like this. And I want you to go and sacrifice in the place where I'm sending you. So one, he makes it clear, he emphasizes it to Abraham, this is your only son. And don't forget, Abraham, it's the son whom you love. I want you to take, yeah, that's the one I mean. And I want you to take him to the place I'm showing you, and I want you to sacrifice him to him. Of course, again, this is the place where things lap over. We've already dealt with Abraham's tremendous faith, and of course he goes without a murmur. But let's look at Isaac here. And you don't get much in Isaac at all. And I'll come to this in a moment. What's happening is that he says to Isaac, you go on, and Isaac is carrying the wood, which is significant. And Isaac asks his father, well, we've got the wood, we've got everything, the knife. Where's the sacrifice? He said, God will provide himself. And then they get there, we're told that when he came to that place on top of Mount Moriah, it says that Abraham took hold of his son Isaac, who, bear in mind, is a growing lad, no small little child by this time, lays him on the altar and binds him to the altar. And the thing is, we see here a man, this is why I've entitled the series about Isaac, surrendered to God. He was already submitted. He didn't resist. We get no impression at all. And he just lay himself on the altar. Well, we know, of course, the rest. Abraham's knife was raised, and a second later it would have been plunged straight into Isaac's heart. No trouble, no danger about that at all. There's no danger to Isaac. But the thing was, God, of course, provided himself a lamb. And we have so little to say about Isaac, really, from this point onwards. The important thing is, you see, with Isaac, is that he's already surrendered himself. And in fact, he is a living dead man. He's a dead man walking. And I believe in a way, and possibly in the next 2 weeks, this will be brought out. We see how Isaac had, in a sense, no will of his own. He was already before God dead. And it was God working out his will and his purpose for him. But the important thing was that, first of all, Isaac had to submit himself to God. And that's an important lesson for us to learn as well, I believe, that, what was it? Submit yourself under the mighty hand of God and he will lift you up in due time. And we think as well, we think of Mount Moriah. We think of somebody else who carried some wood up a hill, centuries and centuries later, and had submitted himself. And the night before he prayed, Father, if it's possible, take this from me, this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. And I think we get the exact type of Jesus. So Isaac is the type of the son of promise, is going to be the sacrifice for our sin. And I believe that God, looking down on that, was saying, Abraham, as you have sacrificed your son, and willing to do that, and my eyes have done that, then that prompts me. There will be a time to come when I will do what you have done and be willing to do, and I will give my own son for you to be that one complete sacrifice. And so Isaac, if you will, is a type of Jesus and foreshadows the promise that is going to come. And so we have that. So Isaac really, from that point onwards, is really like a dead person. And finally, we've had his birth, we've had his death, in that order, as I say. Now his marriage, to find him as wife. And Abraham, we can read this in Genesis 24, it's a long chapter, I don't attempt to, we don't have time to read that, but the gist of it is, the outline is that Abraham calls his servant, his favourite, honoured servant, swear by me that you will go and get a wife for my son Isaac. I don't want you to get a daughter-in-law, a wife for Isaac from here, not from these people, these pagan people, but go back to where I've come from and find a wife from there. So the servant goes on the journey to find a wife. And possibly we can see in that a sort of type of God finding a bride. And the servant, perhaps the type of the Holy Spirit, sent on the way with that commission and to bring back the bride for his son. Which he does. His servant lays out a fleece, doesn't he? Let it be the first girl who comes, and if I say, can you give me some water? And she says, yes, and I'll water your camels. Let this be her. And of course, that's how he finds Rebecca, and she's willing to come immediately. But then we see, don't we, as he brings them back with all the things, all her compliments, her servants, ladies, or whatever. We're told that this lovely, very moving and romantic bit is that there's Isaac in the field one of the evening, just having a walk in the cool of the day, I suppose, and suddenly he sees the camels coming. And then Rebecca notices this young fellow in the distance, said, "Who's this?" He said, "That's my master's son." So she covers herself with a veil, gets off a camel, walks towards him. And we're told that Isaac immediately takes her into his mother's tent, isn't he? And loves her, and he becomes his wife. No problem about it at all. So just as, well, of course, he doesn't have a hand in his birth. His birth was a miraculous birth. His death was a miraculous death in that, in a sense, his father received him back from the dead. He was resurrection life for him. And so, finding a bride, he had really nothing to do with that at all. It was done for him, the servant sent by Abraham. And he accepted that. But because he accepted that, God was able then to move on with his plans and to move on, developing his plans to make from that family a nation. But it had to be because Isaac was submitted to him. God's got plans for us, I believe. But it's as we submit ourselves to him and allow him to have his way in our lives. And so that as we just, close on this particular one, just some thoughts here on this particular situation with the marriage. God arranges those important meetings that are going to take place in our lives. Our part is to be completely submitted to his will as those who are dead to this world and all its values and its self-assertion and its priorities. We leave God, or we should be leaving God, to make the choice of who and when in the things of our lives. I being in the way the Lord led me, the servant said to Laban, wasn't it, when he arrived there in that land to bring back the special wife, lady for Isaac. And we are to allow God to have his way. The timing will always be perfect if we do that. And the test of that is that can we truly, with all our heart, worship God for the outcome? Can we say at the end of it, I worship you? Can we delight in it? Isaac simply accepted what came to him, what happened to him. And as we I'm reminded in Romans at the beginning of chapter 12, be not transformed by this world, but conform to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you will prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Then another thought here from this particular episode. God desires to work out his purposes, and that we are an essential part of his plans. He loves us and wants us to enjoy the fruit and delight of his wisdom and his perfect will. Our part is to say, Lord, have your way in my life. And Isaac stands as an illustration for that as well. And then again, in carrying out his purposes, he delights to connect people, bringing people together, bringing his creation in his image into a deep relationship with each other and with himself. As he did, in fact, it's not good for man to dwell alone, and Isaac was given a wife, wasn't it? And bring us into relationship, connect us with people, in fellowship, in other ways with people we never knew existed, who were made destined to share in glorifying him and enjoying his lordship and his love along with us. And in each one, as he connects us together, and we are made to be connected, bringing their uniqueness to express his sovereignty and perfection of his will, and to provide what is lacking in each other. His will is discovered in our togetherness. You are complete in him who is the head of all principalities and powers. So there we are, very, very briefly. We've got the birth of Isaac and what we can learn from that. We learn from that it was for freedom that Christ has made us free, that we are not sons of a bondwoman, but we are children of promise. Let's not give that up. Let's not sacrifice that to the ways of the world, to any voices which would say, you're not good enough, you won't keep your salvation, and things like this. And people are from the outside, easy to be a spectator when you're running the race set before you, and not but to stand fast in the freedom. You say to yourself, I, like Isaac, am a child of promise. I have inherited the promise that was made to Jesus, that before him there would be joy and blessing. And he humbled himself, became obedient to death of the cross for that joy before him. And was it that Isaac was anticipating great things to come? And we, like him, knowing of the greatness of the great things to come, enjoy that freedom, and in that freedom are open for God to invest himself, his authority, his power, his leading in our lives, as we allow him to take us on in that. And then his death, foreshadowing the greatest death of all, and the resurrection, and reminding us that God loves us, and that he gave his son, and that as Isaac was submitted, so we submitted to the will of our Father. What is it that Paul writes to Colossians as we finish? For you are dead, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. You are dead. And when you're baptized, that's the whole thing, isn't it? You go down into the water to signify you have died with Christ. But wonder of wonders, you're raised up into new life. And there was Isaac into new life, but completely submitted to his father, to the will of God, and wherever God was going to take him. And then finally, the bride. God sought out a bride for his son. I believe that bride is actually the nation of Israel, we being the body. But as well, he seeks out people, Jews and Gentiles, to come to him. And I believe all that groundwork and all the illustration was laid back all those thousands of years ago, when God was dealing with Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. God's had us on his heart all those time, all those thousands of years. He still has us. And who knows what other people he's got on his heart for us now. So, just setting the scene, if you will, for Isaac. His birth, his death, and his marriage. And then to move on and see what happens to him in a couple of episodes in the coming weeks, as we continue for the next fortnight anyway with Surrendered with Isaac. I won't say do wait for next week's gripping and thrilling episode. It may not be, as perhaps with Abraham and we get on to Jacob. But there's some deep truths there which we can find for ourselves as we reflect on them. So may God bless you, and God bless these thoughts to your hearts. Amen.